He handed her a check with 7 figures, a sum that could buy a mansion, but not enough to buy back a shattered soul. "Take it, Eleanor," Julian said, his voice as cold as the Italian marble floors of the home they had built together. "Consider it a severance package. Be gone by morning." She was 8 months pregnant with his son. Standing just behind his shoulder, a triumphant smirk playing on her lips, was his mistress, Isabella. They thought they had won. They thought they had discarded the past and secured their glittering future. But they never imagined that the quiet, pregnant woman they pushed out into the cold held the single key that could detonate their entire empire. And the perfect stage for its spectacular destruction was just weeks away, the annual Innovators Gala. The silence in the Croft mansion was a living thing. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket that had settled over the house in the last 6 months, thick with unspoken words and the ghost of laughter. Eleanor Vance, her body gracefully accommodating the final trimester of her pregnancy, would often stand by the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the manicured lawns of their Greenwich, Connecticut estate, her hand resting on the swell of her stomach. This house, once a symbol of their shared dream, now felt like a beautifully decorated prison. She and Julian Croft had been a team, not just husband and wife, but partners in the truest sense. They'd met at MIT, 2 brilliant minds drawn together by a shared passion for technological innovation and a quiet understanding of each other's ambitions. He was the charismatic frontman, the visionary who could sell a dream to a room of stone-faced investors. She was the architect behind the curtain, the coder, the strategist whose elegant algorithms were the very bedrock of their company. Croft Innovations. Her masterpiece was a predictive analytics engine codenamed Helios, a piece of software so revolutionary it had catapulted their startup into a billion-dollar valuation. Julian had always called her his secret weapon. In the early days, they'd spend nights fueled by coffee and takeout, sketching code on whiteboards, their hands brushing their minds in perfect sync. "You and me, Elle," he'd whisper, kissing her temple. "We're going to build an empire." And they did. But as the empire grew, Julian changed. The man who once saw her as his equal began to see her as an accessory, a beautiful, intelligent fixture in his perfect life. The late nights at the office became more frequent, but the shared excitement was gone. He'd come home smelling of expensive perfume that wasn't hers. Subtle at first, a scent like Chanel No. 5, then more brazen, a musky, exotic fragrance she couldn't place. When she told him she was pregnant for a fleeting moment, the old Julian returned, his eyes, which had become increasingly distant, lit up. He'd swept her into his arms, his joy genuine and overwhelming. They'd named the baby almost immediately Arthur Michael Croft, a strong classic name for the heir to their empire. But the glow faded as quickly as it had appeared. The pregnancy, instead of bringing them closer, became his excuse to pull away further. "You need to rest, Elle. Don't stress yourself with company business," he'd say, patting her hand dismissively when she tried to discuss a critical software update. He hired a new lead programmer, a man he claimed was a hotshot from Silicon Valley, and slowly, methodically locked her out of the systems she had built. Her opinions were no longer sought. They were tolerated. The physical distance grew into a chasm. He moved into the guest wing, citing her discomfort and his need to get a full night's sleep for early meetings. The lie was so thin, it was transparent, yet so cutting, she couldn't bring herself to tear it down. He would miss obstetrician appointments, always with a last-minute unverifiable excuse, an emergency board meeting, a flight delay. a crucial investor call. One Tuesday, Dr. Albright had looked at her with such pity in her eyes as Eleanor lay on the examination table alone, listening to the strong, steady heartbeat of her son. "Everything looks perfect, Eleanor. Arthur is a strong little boy," the doctor had said warmly before her expression softened. Is everything all right? He hasn't made it to one of these in 3 months." Eleanor had forced a smile, the muscles in her face feeling stiff and unfamiliar. "He's just been swamped. You know how it is. Closing a massive new deal." The lie tasted like ash in her mouth. She knew where he was. A charge on their joint American Express card had told her a $2,000 dinner at Per Se in Manhattan the night before, a table for 2. He had told her he was working late on a server migration. The loneliness was the worst part. It was a cold creeping dread that settled deep in her bones. She was surrounded by wealth by staff who answered her every whim, yet she had never felt more isolated. She was the ghost haunting her own life, watching as the man she loved transformed into a stranger before her very eyes. She would talk to Arthur, her voice a soft murmur in the cavernous rooms. "It's just you and me, little guy." She'd whisper, her hand a constant protective shield over her belly. "We're going to be okay. I promise." It was a promise she wasn't sure she could keep. Julian was becoming more than just distant. He was becoming cruel. His comments were veiled insults, little barbs designed to chip away at her confidence. "You look tired, Eleanor. Maybe you should have the housekeeper help you pick out your clothes." "Are you sure you should be eating that? Think of the baby." "Honestly, Elle, try to keep up. The market doesn't stop just because you're feeling sentimental." The final irrevocable crack appeared one evening. 2 weeks before, everything shattered. He was getting ready for an event, a charity dinner, he called it. He was in a tuxedo, looking impossibly handsome, a stranger in a suit she had helped him choose. She was in a simple maternity dress, feeling swollen and weary. "You're not even going to ask if I want to go?" she asked, her voice smaller than she intended. He didn't even turn from the mirror as he adjusted his bow tie. "It's a late night, Eleanor, all standing, lots of schmoozing. It's not for you in your condition." He said the word condition as if it were a disease, an unsightly inconvenience. He turned his eyes sweeping over her, and for a moment she saw not just indifference, but a flicker of genuine disgust. That was the moment she knew. It wasn't just neglect. It was a calculated, deliberate erasure. He was wiping her from the narrative of his life, and she knew with a terrifying certainty that someone else was being written in. The new name being written into Julian Croft's life was Isabella Rossi. She was everything Eleanor was not. Where Eleanor was quiet intellect and understated elegance, Isabella was a supernova of ambition and overt sensuality. She had joined Croft Innovations 6 months prior as a brand strategist, a nebulously defined role that seemed to grant her unlimited access to Julian. Isabella was a masterpiece of calculated perfection. With raven-black hair that fell in a silken curtain, eyes the color of dark chocolate that missed nothing, and a wardrobe of form-fitting designer dresses, she moved through the corporate world like a panther. She was sharp, witty, and possessed a ruthless ability to mirror a person's own ambition back at them, making them feel like the most important person in the world. To Julian, a man increasingly enamored with his own reflection, she was intoxicating. She played her game with surgical precision. She never criticized Eleanor directly. Instead, she used the art of the poisoned compliment. "Eleanor is such a classic beauty," she'd say to Julian over a late-night glass of scotch in his office. "So foundational. It's wonderful that she doesn't feel the need to keep up with the more dynamic trends of today." She praised his genius framing Eleanor's contributions as rudimentary groundwork that he had transformed into greatness. "The original Helios Code was a solid base, of course," she purred, tracing the rim of her glass. "But what you did with it, Julian? The way you monetized it, scaled it, built the empire around it. That's the real magic. She built a blueprint. You built the world." Julian. His ego, already inflated by success, drank it in. He started to believe the narrative Isabella was spinning. His memories began to reshape themselves. The late nights with Eleanor, once a cherished memory of partnership, now seemed like a tedious chore he had endured. Her intellectual brilliance was reframed as a geeky, unglamorous but necessary first step. He was the star, the visionary. She was just the starting block he had launched from. Eleanor first saw Isabella in person by accident. Julian had claimed to be on a business trip to Chicago. Feeling a sudden need for a specific book on prenatal nutrition, Eleanor had driven into the city herself. As she was leaving the bookstore, she saw them. Julian and a stunning woman with impossibly dark hair, laughing as they exited a sleek black Aston Martin, a new purchase he hadn't even mentioned. Isabella looped her arm through his, her head resting on his shoulder with an intimacy that was so casual, so proprietary, it made the air rush from Eleanor's lungs. She watched frozen on the sidewalk as Julian leaned down and kissed her a deep, passionate kiss, filled with a fire he hadn't shown Eleanor in years. It wasn't a furtive, guilty peck. It was a kiss of ownership, a public declaration. In that moment, Eleanor knew her marriage wasn't just failing. It was already dead and buried. She drove home in a daze, the unbought book forgotten. The evidence, once circumstantial, was now a brutal, undeniable truth. The late nights, the separate rooms, the coldness, it all snapped into focus. That night, she confronted him. Not with hysterics or tears, that wasn't her way. She waited until he came into the master suite to retrieve a watch, assuming she was asleep. "Chicago was beautiful, I hope," she said quietly from the armchair in the corner, her voice steady despite the tremor in her heart. Julian froze his back to her. He slowly turned his face a mask of carefully constructed surprise. "What are you talking about? I just got back." "I saw you, Julian, in the city, with her." The charade fell. His face hardened, the feigned innocence replaced by cold annoyance. "So what, you were spying on me?" "I was living my life. Something you seem to have forgotten I have," she retorted, her voice gaining strength. "Who is she?" "Her name is Isabella Rossi." He said the name rolling off his tongue with ease. He didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. "She's my brand strategist." "Is that what they're calling it these days?" The sarcasm was bitter on her tongue. He walked over to the dresser, his movements deliberate, his arrogance a shield. "Look, Eleanor, things have been difficult between us for a long time. You've been so wrapped up in the baby and your nesting. You're not the woman I married. The woman you married helped you build this company from nothing," she shot back, finally rising to her feet. "The woman you married wrote the code that pays for this house, for your new car, for the designer dresses I'm sure your brand strategist wears." "Don't be dramatic," he scoffed. "You wrote some code. I built the business. Let's not rewrite history. Isabella understands the new direction of the company. She understands me." The cruelty of his words was breathtaking. He was not only erasing her from his present, but from their shared past as well. He was diminishing her life's work into some code. "So that's it?" she asked, her voice cracking for the first time. "Years of partnership, our marriage, our son. You're just throwing it all away." He finally looked at her, his eyes devoid of any warmth or love. "I think," he said slowly, his voice dangerously calm, "it's time we were realistic about the future." He left the room, leaving her standing in the vast, empty space, the silence returning heavier and more menacing than ever before. She knew then that a simple confrontation wouldn't be enough. He wasn't just having an affair. He was orchestrating a coup, not just of his life, but of their history. And the woman named Isabella was his willing and eager co-conspirator. The week that followed was a masterclass in psychological warfare. Julian and Isabella didn't hide. They weaponized their affair, turning it into a tool to systematically dismantle Eleanor's life. Isabella's presence became a constant invasive force. Her designer handbag would be left on the console table in the foyer. Her perfume, that same musky scent, would linger in the downstairs study long after she and Julian had concluded their late-night strategy session. They were pushing her, testing her limits, waiting for her to break. They wanted her to become the hysterical pregnant wife, to scream and cry and throw things to give them the justification they needed to cast her aside as unstable. But Eleanor, channeling a reserve of strength she didn't know she possessed, refused to give them the satisfaction. She moved through her home with a quiet, unnerving dignity, her very presence a silent judgment on their tawdry affair. The final brutal act came on a Thursday evening. Eleanor was in the nursery, calmly folding baby clothes and placing them in the dresser. The room was her sanctuary, painted a soft, gentle grey, with a mural of a starry night sky on the ceiling. It was the one room in the house that felt like hers and Arthur's, untainted by the poison seeping through the rest of the mansion. Julian appeared in the doorway, not alone. Isabella stood beside him, her arm linked through his, her expression a mixture of pity and triumph. She was wearing a crimson dress that was offensively vibrant in the serene room. It was a declaration of war. "Eleanor, we need to talk," Julian said, his tone flat and rehearsed. Eleanor didn't turn around immediately. She carefully folded a tiny pair of socks, her movements deliberate and calm. "There's nothing to talk about, Julian. You've made your position perfectly clear." "On the contrary," Isabella interjected, her voice smooth as silk. "We feel it's only fair to be direct with you, for the baby's sake." The audacity of her mentioning her baby sent a hot flash of rage through Eleanor, but she kept her composure. She turned to face them, her hand resting on her stomach, her gaze fixed solely on Julian. "She doesn't get to speak about my son." Julian sighed, a sound of pure exasperation, as if Eleanor were being a difficult child. "This is what I'm talking about, Elle. This hostility. It's not healthy. Isabella is going to be a part of my life now, a part of this family. This family," Eleanor repeated, her voice dripping with disbelief, "consists of you, me, and the unborn child you seem to view as a footnote. She is a home wrecker, Julian. Let's not pretend she's anything else." Isabella laughed, a short, sharp sound that echoed off the nursery walls. "Oh, darling, you can't wreck something that's already a ruin." Julian was suffocating. "I just gave him a reason to breathe." That was when Julian delivered the final blow. He stepped forward, pulling a document and a check from his jacket pocket. He placed them on the changing table next to a stack of diapers. "This is a separation agreement drafted by my lawyers," he said, his voice devoid of all emotion. "It's very generous, and that's a cashier's check for $1 million. It should be enough for you to find a new place, get settled, and not have to worry about anything until after the baby is born. The alimony and child support arrangements are outlined in the agreement. Eleanor stared at the check at the sterile typed words on the legal document. $1 million. He was trying to buy her silence, to purchase her absence, to put a price tag on their entire history together. It was the ultimate insult. "Take it, Eleanor," he said, his voice as cold as the Italian marble floors downstairs. "Consider it a severance package. Be gone by morning." She looked from the check to his face, searching for any flicker of the man she had married, any hint of remorse or pain. She found nothing. His eyes were hard, resolute. Beside him, Isabella simply smirked, a look of pure, unadulterated victory on her face. She ran a perfectly manicured hand up his arm, staking her claim. The silence stretched thick and unbearable. Eleanor's world had been reduced to this single, brutal transaction in the middle of her unborn son's nursery. Finally, she spoke, her voice quiet, but ringing with a steely resolve that surprised even herself. "You're right about one thing, Julian. It is time for me to go." She picked up the check, not looking at it. Then she looked at Isabella. Truly looked at her for the first time. Not as a rival, but as an opponent in a game Isabella didn't even know she was playing. "Enjoy the house," Eleanor said, her voice eerily calm. "I trust you'll find it's not as sturdy as it looks." She walked past them, out of the nursery, out of the room, filled with the ghost of a future that would never be. She didn't look back. The shattering was complete. But as she walked down the grand staircase of the house she had helped build, a new feeling began to eclipse the pain, a cold, clear, diamond-hard fury. They thought they had discarded her. They thought they had won. But Julian and Isabella had made a fatal miscalculation. They had forgotten who Eleanor Vance truly was. She wasn't just a wife or a mother-to-be. She was an architect. And if she could build an empire, she could sure as hell design its fall. The first 48 hours after leaving the mansion were a blur of numb autopilot. Eleanor drove until the sun came up, ending up in a generic but clean Marriott, far enough away to feel like a different state of being. She checked in under her maiden name, paid in cash, from an emergency fund she'd kept for years, and collapsed onto the impersonal, king-sized bed, the $1 million check feeling like a venomous snake in her purse. For one full day, she allowed herself to grieve. The storm she had held back for months finally broke. Sobs racked her body, steep, painful bursts of grief for her marriage, for the family she had dreamed of, for the man Julian used to be. She cried for her son, who would be born into a broken home. And she cried for herself, for the profound, soul-crushing betrayal. The weight of it all combined with the sheer physical exhaustion of late-stage pregnancy was immense. She felt utterly and completely alone. Julian made sure of that. Her phone, a line on his family plan, was disconnected by noon the next day. Her access to their joint bank accounts was frozen. The credit cards were declined. He was methodically and efficiently severing every tie, trying to strand her on a financial island with only the severance he had provided. He was trying to break her spirit, to force her to accept his terms out of sheer desperation. But on the third day, the storm passed. The tears dried up, and what remained was the cold, hard fury that had begun to spark in the nursery. She looked at her reflection in the hotel mirror, her face puffy, her eyes red-rimmed, her belly a prominent, beautiful sphere. She was not a victim. She was a survivor. And she was a mother. "Okay, Arthur," she whispered to her reflection, her hand resting on her stomach. "Time to fight back." Her first call was to the one person in Julian's orbit she knew she could trust, Marcus Thorne. Marcus wasn't just Croft Innovation's chief legal counsel. He was an old friend from their MIT days. A quiet, brilliant man with an unimpeachable moral compass. Marcus had been with the company from the beginning. He had watched Julian's transformation with growing unease and had always treated Eleanor with a deep, abiding respect. She bought a cheap burner phone and called his direct line. "Marcus Thorne," his familiar, steady voice answered. "Marcus, it's Eleanor. Eleanor Vance." She used her maiden name instinctively. There was a pause, then a rush of concern in his voice. "Eleanor." "My God, where are you?" Julian told everyone you'd gone to stay with family out west, that you needed space. "I tried your cell, but it was disconnected. Is everything all right?" "No, Marcus, nothing is all right," she said. And then for the first time, she told someone the entire story. The affair, the gaslighting, the cruelty, the check being thrown out of her own home. She spoke with a calm, factual clarity that was more damning than any tears. Marcus listened without interruption. The silence on his end of the line was heavy, charged with a controlled anger. When she finished, he spoke, his voice low and tight. "That inhuman son of a bitch. I knew he was changing, but this is monstrous. Eleanor, what do you need?" "Anything. Name it." "I need a lawyer," she said. "Not just a divorce lawyer. I need a killer. And I need you to tell me something. Does my name still appear anywhere on the original patent filings for the Helios engine?" There was a rustle of papers on his end. "Let me see. I'm pulling up the foundational IP documents now. Yes, Julian is listed as the primary inventor, but you are listed as co-inventor. It's right here. Eleanor Vance. Your signature is on the original submission from 8 years ago." A slow, grim smile spread across Eleanor's face. It was the first time she had smiled in days. Julian, in his arrogance, had made a critical error. In his rush to build his own legend, he had forgotten to completely bury the truth. He had diminished her role, but he hadn't or couldn't erase it. "He called my life's work some code, Marcus," she said, her voice hardening. "He's telling the world, our world, that he is the sole genius behind Croft Innovations. He's building his entire legacy on that lie. He's giving the keynote at the Innovators Gala in 3 weeks," Marcus said, the pieces clicking into place in his sharp legal mind. "He's being presented with the Visionary of the Decade Award. The entire speech is about his solitary journey creating Helios." "Exactly," Eleanor said. "He's planning to cement the lie in public in front of the entire tech industry, and that's where we're going to burn it all down." "What's the plan, Eleanor? First, I'm cashing this check. He meant it as a payoff, but I'm going to use it as a war chest. Second, I need you to quietly gather everything. My original server logs the beta phase emails between me and the engineering team. My handwritten notebooks from the concept stage, they should still be in the safe in my old home office. Julian won't have thought to destroy them. His ego wouldn't even consider them a threat. I need irrefutable proof that I was not just a co-inventor, but the primary architect of Helios." "Consider it done," Marcus said without hesitation. "He won't see it coming." "There's one more thing," Eleanor said. "Isabella Rossi. She's too smart to just be a mistress. She's a brand strategist. Her resume is thin. I want to know who she really is, who she worked for before this, who she talks to. I have a feeling she's not just climbing the social ladder. She's planting a flag for someone else." "I'll hire a private investigator," Marcus confirmed. "The best in the business. Discretion is guaranteed." As she hung up the phone, Eleanor felt the last vestiges of fear and despair evaporate, replaced by a chilling sense of purpose. Julian had left her alone in the storm, expecting her to be washed away. But he had forgotten that she was the one who understood the currents. He had started a war, and she was about to deploy a weapon he had long since forgotten. She possessed the unvarnished truth. The next 3 weeks were a blur of clandestine meetings and meticulous planning. Eleanor moved from the anonymous Marriott to a discreet extended-stay apartment in a different town, a place registered under a corporate LLC Marcus had set up for her. She was a ghost completely off Julian's grid. While he and Isabella were flaunting their new-life paparazzi shots of them at chic Manhattan restaurants, gushing interviews with business magazines about Julian's singular vision, Eleanor was building her arsenal. The $1 million check was deposited into a new bank account, and a high-powered, famously relentless intellectual property litigator named Diana Sterling was retained. Diana, a woman with a reputation for eviscerating arrogant tech billionaires in court, listened to Eleanor's story with a grim, focused intensity. "It's the oldest story in the book," Diana said during their first meeting her office overlooking the city skyline. "The brilliant woman behind the charismatic man. They always think they can just write you out of the story. We're going to give them a new ending." Marcus proved to be an invaluable and loyal ally. Under the guise of an internal audit, he retrieved a treasure trove of evidence from the mansion and from the company's deep archives. He found Eleanor's original notebooks filled with pages of complex equations and the very first structural drawings of the Helios architecture. He unearthed early emails where a young Julian praised her, writing things like, "Elle, this is pure genius. Without your brain, this is just a vague idea." He found server logs with timestamps proving her user ID was the one that wrote and compiled over 80% of the core code. It was a mountain of irrefutable proof. "He didn't even cover his tracks," Marcus said, shaking his head in disbelief as they reviewed the files in Diana's office. His narcissism made him sloppy. He genuinely believes his own lie now. Meanwhile, the private investigator Marcus hired a former FBI agent named David Chen, began digging into Isabella Rossi's life. What he found was far more explosive than a simple story of a gold-digging mistress. Isabella's real name was Isabella Rinaldi. Her resume was a fabrication. She had never worked at the prestigious marketing firms she claimed. Her last real job was as a junior analyst at Titan Dynamics, Croft Innovations' fiercest and most bitter rival. Titan had been trying for years to develop a predictive engine to compete with Helios and had failed spectacularly every time. David Chen's surveillance was thorough. He uncovered encrypted emails and burner phone records between Isabella and a senior vice president at Titan Dynamics, a man named Leonard Shaw. The timeline was damning. Isabella had been placed at Croft Innovations as a corporate spy. Her mission was to get close to Julian, exploit his ego, and extract any information she could about the future development of Helios, specifically the upcoming Helios 2.0 upgrade. It wasn't just about stealing information, David explained, presenting his findings. Her secondary objective was destabilization. By pushing you out, Eleanor, she removed the one person who could truly advance the Helios platform. She isolated Julian, making him completely dependent on her and more vulnerable to manipulation. The affair wasn't just a bonus, it was the primary tool of her trade. Eleanor felt a cold knot form in her stomach. Julian hadn't just been seduced. He had been played expertly and ruthlessly. His own arrogance and cruelty had made him the perfect mark. He thought he was in control, but he was merely a pawn in Isabella's much larger, more destructive game. The plan coalesced. It was no longer just about exposing Julian's lie. It was about a complete and total detonation of the false reality he and Isabella had constructed. The Innovators' Gala was the perfect stage. Diana Sterling and her team began drafting the mother of all lawsuits, set to be filed the morning after the gala. It would demand not just financial compensation, but a public retraction and the legal reinstatement of Eleanor as the primary inventor of the Helios technology. Marcus, using his top-level admin privileges, worked with a trusted, discreet technician to gain backdoor access to the gala's audiovisual systems. The Grand Astoria Ballroom had a state-of-the-art 50-foot digital screen behind the main stage, which would be used for Julian's tribute video. That video was about to get a last-minute edit. Eleanor, for her part, prepared herself. She spent her days not just planning her revenge, but also preparing for her future. She set up a trust for Arthur. She began sketching out ideas for her own consulting firm, a company that would be built on ethics and true partnership. And she bought a dress. It was not a revenge dress, in the typical sense, not something flashy or provocative. It was a custom-made gown in a deep sapphire blue, elegantly tailored to accommodate her 8.5-month pregnancy. It was a dress that radiated power, confidence, and serenity. It was the armor of a woman who was not coming to the gala as a victim, but as a queen about to reclaim her throne. On the eve of the gala, the team had their final meeting. The evidence was compiled into a slick, devastating video presentation. The lawsuit was ready to be filed. The private investigator's report on Isabella was ready to be leaked to key financial journalists who would be in attendance. "Are you ready for this, Eleanor?" Marcus asked, his expression serious. "Once this starts, there's no turning back. It's going to be a firestorm." Eleanor placed a hand on her belly, feeling the strong, reassuring kick of her son. "Julian built his empire on a lie," she said, her voice steady and clear. "Isabella thinks she's conquered it. Tomorrow night, they'll find out what happens when you build your castle on a fault line. I'm not just here to watch it fall. I'm the earthquake." The Grand Astoria Ballroom was a glittering spectacle of power and wealth. Crystal chandeliers, each the size of a small car, cast a diamond-like glow over the room. The air hummed with the conversations of tech titans, venture capitalists, and industry journalists. It was the pinnacle of Julian Croft's world, the annual Innovators' Gala, and tonight he was its undisputed king. He stood near the stage, a glass of champagne in his hand, Isabella clinging to his arm. She was resplendent in a backless, sequined gold dress that seemed poured onto her body. She surveyed the room with the possessive air of a conqueror, laughing a little too loudly, her hand possessively stroking Julian's chest. They were the ultimate power couple, radiating success and untouchable arrogance. "They're practically eating out of your hand, darling," Isabella murmured in his ear, nodding towards a group of investors who were watching him with reverence. "The visionary of the decade. It has such a nice ring to it." "It's just the beginning," Julian said, his chest puffing out. He felt invincible. He had it all: the company, the award, the beautiful woman on his arm. The memory of Eleanor was a distant, faded photograph, an inconvenient piece of his past he had successfully cropped out of the picture. He hadn't heard a word from her since she'd left, which only confirmed his belief that she was weak, broken, and had scurried away with his generous payoff. Then at precisely 8:30 p.m., just as the guests were being called to their tables, the grand ballroom doors opened. A hush fell over the room, a ripple of curiosity that turned into a wave of stunned silence. Eleanor Vance walked in. She was not the weary, downtrodden woman they might have expected to see. She was a vision of serene power. Her sapphire blue gown flowed around her, a stark, elegant contrast to Isabella's glittering gold. Her hair was styled in a simple, graceful updo, and her face, free of any overt signs of stress, radiated a calm, unshakable confidence. She was luminous, her pregnancy not a condition or a weakness, but a symbol of life and strength. She didn't look like a woman who had been discarded. She looked like a woman who had arrived. She walked in alone, but she was not unnoticed. Marcus Thorne met her just inside the door, greeting her with a respectful nod and offering his arm. People began to whisper. They all knew the story Julian had spun, that his reclusive, genius wife had retired from the tech world to focus on her pregnancy and preferred a quiet life away from the spotlight. Her sudden, spectacular appearance directly contradicted the narrative. Julian saw her, and for the first time that night, his perfect composure cracked. The smile froze on his face. He felt a jolt, as if the floor had dropped out from under him. She wasn't supposed to be here. She wasn't supposed to look like that, so poised, so regal, so utterly unbroken. Isabella's smirk tightened into a venomous scowl. "What is she doing here?" She hissed, her grip on Julian's arm, becoming painfully tight. "Who let her in? I don't know," Julian muttered. His eyes locked on Eleanor as she and Marcus were shown to a prominent table near the front, a table Marcus had arranged. "She looks different." "She looks pregnant," Isabella snapped. "Probably here to make a scene, to cry and beg for you back. How pathetic. We'll have security remove her." But Isabella's words lacked conviction. She saw the same thing Julian did. This was not a woman on the verge of a breakdown. This was a woman holding all the cards. Eleanor met Julian's gaze from across the room. She didn't scowl or glare. She simply held his eyes for a moment, her expression unreadable, and then gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod before turning her attention to the stage. The nod unnerved him more than any outburst could have. It wasn't a threat. It felt like a countdown. The gala's host, a famous tech journalist, took the stage. The lights dimmed. The dinner service began, but no one was focused on their food. The atmosphere in the room was thick with tension, an unspoken awareness that the night's official script had just been torn to pieces. Julian tried to regain his composure, forcing a smile as people came by to congratulate him. But his eyes kept darting back to Eleanor's table. She was simply sipping her water, listening intently to the opening speech as the picture of calm. It was the calm before the storm. The calm of an architect who knows that the building's demolition is scheduled to the second and all the charges have been perfectly placed. All she had to do now was wait for the show to begin. "And now," the host boomed, his voice resonating with theatrical importance through the silent ballroom. "It is my distinct honor to present the Visionary of the Decade Award to a man who single-handedly redefined the future of predictive analytics, the architect of the Helios engine, the founder and CEO of Croft Innovations, Mr. Julian Croft." A thunderous, sustained applause filled the room. A wave of adulation that Julian rode to the stage. He felt invincible, the nagging unease from Eleanor's arrival washed away by the sheer force of the room's approval. This was his moment. He had earned this. He kissed Isabella, a performative act of possession for the cameras, and strode confidently onto the stage. The award, a heavy abstract sculpture of polished obsidian and gold, felt solid and real in his hands, a tangible symbol of his success. He gripped it tightly, its weight, a confirmation of his own. He approached the podium, basking in the glow of the spotlights. He saw the faces in the crowd, investors, rivals, journalists, all looking up at him with a mixture of envy and reverence. He spotted Eleanor at her table, her expression as placid as a deep lake. He dismissed her with a final arrogant thought. Let her watch. Let her see what she lost. Thank you. He began, his voice a smooth, confident baritone that had charmed boardrooms and investors for over a decade. Thank you all. To be called a visionary is humbling. But vision, as we all know, is nothing without execution. It's one thing to have a dream. It's another thing entirely to build it alone in the dark. He paused for effect, letting the words hang in the air. 10 years ago, I had an idea that we could use data not just to look at the past, but to map the future. It was a lonely road. Many called it impossible. There were countless nights fueled by nothing but lukewarm coffee and a burning conviction where I worked in solitude, writing the foundational code line by painstaking line, brick by brick, for what would eventually become Helios. As he spoke, the grand 50-foot screen behind him lit up with his tribute video. It was a slick, expensive production, showing artfully shot images of Julian, looking thoughtful, scribbling on glass walls, leading passionate meetings. His own voiceover narrated the heroic tale. They don't see the sacrifice, the voiceover lamented over a shot of Julian, rubbing his tired eyes in a darkened office. The moments of doubt, the sheer force of will it takes to bring something truly new into the world. Then for a single frame the image stuttered, a flash of static so brief that many missed it. Julian, however, caught it from the corner of his eye and frowned slightly. A glitch. He continued undeterred. But I believe that true innovation requires that solitary struggle. The screen flickered again, more violently this time. The glossy image of Julian dissolved into a chaotic swirl of digital noise. Then through the static, a new image resolved itself, grainy and raw. It was a webcam photo of a much younger Eleanor, her hair in a messy bun, thick glasses perched on her nose. She was staring with laser-like focus at a monitor filled with dense lines of code. A date and time stamp glowed in the bottom corner. October 17th, 2015, 3:47 a.m. Julian stopped his speech mid-sentence. A confused murmur rippled through the audience. What was this? A mistake. Part of the presentation. Then the image changed. It was a high-resolution scan of a page from one of Eleanor's notebooks. Her elegant, cursive handwriting detailed the core logic of the Helios recursion algorithm, the complex, beautiful equations that were the engine's very soul. Her signature, E. Vance, was clear and undeniable at the bottom of the page. Julian's blood ran cold. This wasn't a glitch. This was an attack. His mind raced. Who? Titan Dynamics, a hacker. The screen changed again. An email stark white text on a black background filled the enormous display. It was from his own account, sent to Eleanor 8 years ago. Elle, this is pure genius. I've been staring at this problem for a month, and you solved it in a weekend. Without your brain, this is just a vague idea. You've cracked it. A collective gasp went through the room. The murmuring grew louder, more urgent. People were leaning forward in their seats, pulling out their phones to record the unbelievable scene. Another email flashed on the screen, then another. A chat log from their early collaboration. A video snippet of a young, excited Julian saying to someone off camera, "Okay, I'll handle the pitch, but you have to walk them through the tech L. You're the only one who actually understands it at this level." Then the video cut to a professionally shot interview clip. It was Michael Chen, their first lead engineer, a man now working at Google. Eleanor Vance, he said, his expression earnest. She wasn't just a co-founder. She was Helios. Julian was the salesman, A brilliant one. Don't get me wrong, but Eleanor was the architect. She wrote the core code, she designed the database structure, she solved the predictive modeling problem that everyone else said was impossible. We all knew it. To say otherwise is just a lie. Julian stood frozen at the podium, his knuckles white where he gripped its edges. His triumphant smile had melted into a grotesque mask of horror. The screen behind him was now a split screen. On one side, it showed his own panicked, ashen face broadcast from the live camera feed. On the other, the evidence continued to mount with brutal, systematic precision. Server logs, code compilations, under her user ID patent documents, with her name clearly listed as co-inventor. It was a devastating digital avalanche of truth burying his carefully constructed fiction. There seems to be a technical difficulty. He stammered into the microphone, his voice a hoarse, unrecognizable croak. As Julian's world was publicly imploding, the second phase of the attack was silently and swiftly executed. Across the room, phones began to buzz in the pockets of key journalists, investors, and board members. It was a simultaneous, targeted data drop. The leaked file was David Chen's complete, meticulously documented report on Isabella Rossi. At a table near the front, a senior writer for Forbes opened the file. His eyes widened. He quickly shared the link with his colleague from the Wall Street Journal. Within seconds, the information was spreading through the ballroom's elite like a virus. Isabella Rinaldi, Titan Dynamics, corporate espionage, destabilization protocol. Isabella felt the shift instantly. The air around her turned to ice. A board member who had been laughing with her minutes before now stared at her with an expression of pure, cold fury. An investor's wife physically recoiled when Isabella's dress brushed her arm. The whispers were no longer about Julian. They were about her. Her phone began to vibrate violently in her clutch, a non-stop stream of panicked, furious messages from her contacts at Titan Dynamics, disavowing her, cutting her loose. Her carefully constructed world, her perfect conquest, was dissolving into chaos. She looked at the screen at the irrefutable evidence of Eleanor's genius. She looked at Julian, a broken, humiliated statue on the stage. And she looked at the faces of contempt, all aimed at her. She wasn't a queen. She was a liability, a disposable asset. In her arrogance, she had underestimated not just Eleanor, but the brutal, unforgiving nature of the game she was playing. With a choked bow, she stood up and fled. Not with grace, but with a desperate, clumsy scramble, pushing past stunned guests. The camera flashes of the press felt like physical blows, each one searing her spectacular failure into public memory. On stage, Julian was alone, utterly and completely alone. The applause was a distant memory replaced by a heavy, oppressive silence, broken only by the frantic clicking of cameras. He let go of the Visionary of the Decade award. It fell from his grasp, tumbling in slow motion, before hitting the stage with a sickening metallic crash that seemed to crack the very foundation of the silence. It wobbled, then lay still, a monument to his disgrace. The video on the screen faded to black, replaced by a single, stark sentence. In elegant white text, the truth has a patent of its own. Eleanor Vance. Then, as if summoned by her own words, Eleanor rose from her chair. A path cleared for her as she walked towards the stage, the crowd parting as if for royalty. Her movements were not rushed. They were deliberate, serene, powerful. She ascended the few steps to the stage and stood over the wreckage of Julian's career. She didn't spare a single glance for the shattered man who was once her husband, who now looked like a ghost haunting the scene of his own death. She calmly picked up the microphone he had abandoned. "My name is Eleanor Vance," she said, her voice clear, steady, and amplified, carrying to every corner of the stunned ballroom. "And I am the primary architect of the Helios engine. Croft Innovations was built on a partnership I cherished. It has faltered because it lost its way. Now it will be rebuilt on a foundation of truth and integrity." She looked out at the audience, her gaze sweeping over the shocked faces, her presence commanding absolute attention. "The future is not written by one person," she continued, her hand gently resting on her pregnant stomach. "It is built by many, and I intend to build a better one." She placed the microphone carefully back on the podium and turned to leave. She walked past Julian, who remained frozen in his humiliation, and descended the stairs. The press surged forward, a wall of cameras, and shouted questions, but they stopped short, silenced by the sheer, unassailable dignity she projected. She walked through their parted ranks, her head held high, and exited the Grand Astoria ballroom. She had not come for revenge. She had come to reclaim her name, her work, and her future. And as she stepped out into the cool night air, leaving the firestorm behind her, she wasn't walking into the cold. She was walking into the dawn of her own brilliantly engineered new day. Eleanor's story is a powerful reminder that the truth, no matter how deeply buried, will always find its way to the surface. It shows us that true strength isn't about the noise you make, but about the foundations you build. Julian and Isabella learned the hard way that karma isn't just a concept, it's a debt, and it always gets paid, often, in the most public and spectacular way imaginable. Eleanor didn't just reclaim her legacy. She built a new one on her own terms for herself and for her son Arthur. She proved that the most powerful empires are not built on lies and betrayal, but on integrity, brilliance, and the unbreakable spirit of a person who refuses to be erased. If you were moved by Eleanor's incredible journey from betrayal to triumph, please show your support by hitting that like button. Share this story with someone who needs a reminder of their own strength. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more unforgettable stories of justice and empowerment. What did you think of Julian and Isabella's downfall? Let us know in the comments below.